This is Imperialism number 2, and we are continuing to talk about imperialism and its causes, and we're going to get into the acquisition of Alaska and the annexation of Hawaii. So one of the reasons why countries want to take over other nations is because of military strength. If you remember back in the Cold War, the Soviet Union and Cuba was in cahoots. So the Soviet Union's all the way over here, Cuba's over here. So that puts them right next to the United States. And if you recall, the same time the United States was over in Turkey, and we were friends with a lot of other countries over here in different parts of Europe. So having a military presence across the globe helps you out when it comes to military strength. If you look at this map, the United States basically has a military presence in 3 out of 4 countries across the globe. And what this guy said, and this was early, all right, so 1783 is when the Revolutionary War ended, and what he said, this is Alfred T. Mahan, what he said is that control of the seas with the military would control the world. Now, obviously, the idea of airplanes was not on his mind, but everybody had boats, and if you look throughout history, the countries that were the strongest were the ones with the best navy. Spain for a while. We've talked during the Age of Exploration that Portugal became powerful because they were the ones sending explorers out, and then the British Navy became powerful. If you look at Germany during World War I, they had the U-boats that were sinking things, so then they became powerful, and then you have the United States after World War I and World War II creating the biggest military. So there is a connection between owning land and having a large military and being a superpower. America greatly believed in this idea, so we went out and tried to conquer lots of small islands, and that's why we were out in the Pacific and getting Hawaii and a lot of those other islands out there. So what we're going to look at is the acquisition of Alaska, and it's just that. We acquired it. That means we bought it, all right? The guy that bought it, his name was William Seward. He bought it in 1867 from Russia. He paid $7.2 million, which was only 2 cents an acre. Kids, if you can get any land for 2 cents an acre, I don't care where it is, buy it. If you recall, the last big purchase that we made for land was in 1803 from France. Napoleon was the leader at the time, and that was the Louisiana Territory. And if you recall, Napoleon sold that to the United States because he wanted to beat Britain in a war. All right, so we make this other huge land purchase. And again, like I said in the last video, the United States has had the idea of imperialism on our mind for a long time. In 1959, I believe it was August of 1959, Alaska becomes a state. And its importance, it's rich in timber, it has a lot of minerals, and it has a lot of oil. All right, not a lot of people thought that was a big deal at the time. It's something else that people didn't realize. Just imagine what would have happened in the Cold War if Russia, then the Soviet Union, would have had control of Alaska. I think things would have gone a little bit different. This here is the check that we used to purchase Alaska in 1867. A lot of people made fun of this guy. All right, it says map of the Russian fairyland. Basically, a lot of people thought that William Seward spent a lot of money, and it was unnecessary. They called it an icebox, which is basically a freezer. It was known as Seward's icebox or folly. Folly is like when you make a mistake. So you guys would call it like a fail. It would be Seward's fail. The financial value of the Alaska purchase turned out to be many times greater than what the U.S. paid for it at the time. So if Seward were alive today and seeing how valuable it is with all the oil and minerals and those types of things, people wouldn't be laughing at him. He'd be laughing at them. And Alaska's freaking huge. All right, if you look at all these little small islands, it literally stretches from the east coast to the west coast. All right, so Alaska is the largest state. If you look at it compared to Texas here, it is much bigger than Texas. So Alaska is the largest state that we have. Next is Hawaii. All right, so we're going to look at how we got Hawaii, and this is kind of a cool story for those of you that have never heard this story. And I hope one of you is eating a Dole fruit cup right now, and if you are, that's awesome because that guy was an important person in the way that we gained Hawaii. So if you look in this area here, here's Guam. We are actually going to take over Guam as well. And then we try to take over a lot of these other places. When you get into Mr. Hennig's class next year, he's going to talk about island hopping during World War II, and he's going to talk about a lot of these islands here. The annexation of Hawaii, annexation basically means we were like, this is ours now, and we just took it, all right? However, there's a lot of backstory to this, all right? And so in the 1800s, Hawaii was an important merchant stop. Merchants, that's where people would trade, so we would trade with Asia there. And in 1820s, we had a lot of missionaries who would plant schools and churches there. And these people are important because their children became sugar planters, and that's going to become important. Sugar production skyrockets in the mid to late 1800s. Again, that is when we get consumerism. So that's tying into what we talked about last chapter. And that's when people are buying a lot of goods. That's when pop is being made, or soda. And that's when they're making chocolate and candy and those types of things in the mid to late 1800s. In 1867, we take control of the Midway Islands, which are just west of Hawaii. And then in 1875, we begin to import Hawaiian sugar duty-free. This is important. Duty-free means no taxes. So there were 0 taxes on Hawaiian sugar. Please remember, Hawaii is a different country. If you remember 2 chapters ago, when we were talking, was it 2 chapters ago? It was 2 chapters ago. We were talking about the presidency and patronage and its connection to big business. That's going to play a role here, so please make sure that you remember that stuff. So, in 1887, we built Pearl Harbor. This was not when Pearl Harbor happened, people. This was when the naval base Pearl Harbor was built. All right? In 1887, also, King Kalakaua forced to give voting rights to wealthy landowners. Even though they weren't technically citizens, they forced him to give them voting rights. Now, this is a key here. In 1790, there was the McKinley Tariff Act. So what this does is it eliminates tax-free sugar from Hawaii. So what that means, those sugar planters from Hawaii have to pay a tax to sell their sugar in America. So, and again, these were the descendants of Americans. So they considered themselves Americans, and they were upset at the fact that they had to pay a tax to sell their sugar in America. So they were American planters in Hawaii, and they wanted annexed so that they didn't have to pay taxes. Because if Hawaii becomes a state, they don't pay a tariff because it's trading within their own country. I'm hoping this is making sense. All right. Again, we should be remembering some things we talked about a few weeks ago. Now the queen, her name is Liliuokalani. Very pretty name, Liliuokalani. She proclaimed something that it's Hawaii for Hawaiians. So this is what happens. You got John Stevens. All right, so he organizes a revolution to try to overthrow the queen. We have talked about this before. Some of you, if you recall, Panama, the United States started a revolution so that Panama wouldn't be controlled by Colombia anymore. And we were doing this basically almost at the exact same time. All right, so it was within the same decade that we were doing this thing, just overthrowing countries. That's what imperialism is. All right, you are doing whatever you can to take over those countries. So Grover Cleveland was the president at the time. He would not annex them without a vote of the people. The same thing happened in 1994 in Puerto Rico. It's actually happened 2 other times in Puerto Rico. I think as recent as 2014, where they have voted to become a state. And then in 1898, President McKinley annexed Hawaii. All right, so one of the main guys that was one of those sugar planters was Sanford B. Dole, who becomes the founder of the Dole Fruit Company, basically. So that guy, that's why I was asking a little bit ago about those with Dole Fruit Cups. He is one of the influential people who helped America steal Hawaii from the Hawaiians. So what we did is we overthrew the Queen and we set up our own government. We did this in 1898, and the reason we did it is it's a trading post. We wanted a military base there. We wanted the people there to be a market for our good. It's also lands. We also got sugar from them to produce in our factories that were producing food and candy and those types of things. All right, so here's a question for you. It's how did Queen Liliuokalani's main goal conflict with American imperialist goals? Well, the American imperialists wanted to take over the country. She wanted the country for herself. So both people wanted one thing. I'm sure you guys can easily write a connection to something like that. All right, this video is over. We're going to talk more about some other things that the United States takes.